I've been thinking a lot about something this month. What does it actually look like to care about people without losing yourself in the process? Hey everyone, welcome back to the couch. I'm Caitlin, a therapist who really loves anime, and this is our monthly couch chat. So, this month we watched Princess Mononoke, Fruits Basket, and Demon Slayer. And I don't know, nothing felt super simple, right? About any of them. It wasn't really about heroes or villains for me. Uh, it felt more like everyone was just trying to survive with what they've been given, right? And that creates a lot of overlap between love, harm, right, and responsibility. And that's kind of what kept sitting with me all of this month. In Princess Mononoke, I kept noticing how nobody really gets to be the bad guy, right? Um, Even when people are causing harm, they're also trying to protect something, right? So whether that's they're trying to survive, a community, right, that they've built, or just general safety. Uh, and I think what stuck with me is really just how uncomfortable all of that is to sit with, right? Um, when there's no clean answer for anything. And I feel like that's a good reflection also with life, right? Because that's usually the case as well. Um, so right, it's not just about right versus wrong. Um, I guess we can see it as like it's competing needs, right? And then in Fruits Basket, something, you know, Toru, right? I'm just gonna say point blank period. I kept coming back to Toru, which is not a surprise, right? She is so naturally giving. It's just starting to feel automatic at this point. Um, but I think what I started noticing more this time is how she rarely pauses to check in with herself, right? And I don't think that's intentional, right? It's more like when you become the person who holds things for everybody else, right? It can slowly start to feel like that's your role. Um, and if you don't question it anymore, right? Um, until maybe something forces you to, right? With her getting sick. Um, and then in Demon Slayer, right? With Tanjiro, with him as well, right? He always carries this empathy with him, even in these really intense and dangerous moments. Um, but what's interesting is that his empathy doesn't stop him from acting, though, right? He doesn't get stuck in it. Um, I think that balance is something, you know what I mean, that continues to stay with me because a lot of time, a lot of the time, I feel like people assume empathy means that, or maybe they maybe not assume, but they just equate it to, right, absorbing everything emotionally. Um, but Tanjiro shows us something different, right? He feels it and he continues to move forward. If I had to narrow it down, it's not one moment exactly that I feel like stayed with me. It's more like a pattern I kept noticing across these stories. This tension between understanding someone deeply and still needing to take care of yourself in the process. Um, and how those two things don't always naturally align, right? I think the thread of this month was something like, what happens when care and self-protection exist in this same space, right? Um, or maybe another way of saying this could be, right, like how do you stay open without disappearing? One thing I keep coming back to is the idea that compassion and self-protection often feel like they're in opposition. Like, it has to be one or the other. Either you're understanding and available to people, or you're setting boundaries and pulling back. But I don't know. I wonder if this framing is too simple, right? Because in reality, both things seem to be happening at the same time, right? Especially within these stories. You can understand someone's pain and still not be able to, stay in that same position forever. Um, you can care about somebody deeply and still need distance, right? And I think sometimes the struggle is not choosing between them, but figuring out how do we hold both of those without guilt. Um, that's the part that really resonates with me. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into what we've watched, right? So in Princess Mononoke, I kept noticing how understanding somebody's pain doesn't automatically make that situation easier. You can fully empathize with everybody involved, and you can still feel torn, right, about what's happening. And I think that's what makes it so realistic. Because clarity isn't always the result of understanding, right? Sometimes understanding just makes things more complicated. Uh, in Fruits Basket, I kept thinking about how Toru gives so much of herself without really stopping to consider what she might need in return. Um, and again, right, I don't think that's a flaw, right, in her character. I think it's something that's honestly pretty relatable. Um, a lot of people learn early on that maybe being good means being helpful, available or supportive, right? And over time, that can just be, it can become our default way of existing, even when it's exhausting. Um, even when nobody's really asking us to do that anymore, right? And then with Tanjiro, I kept noticing his empathy, right? It doesn't erase him moving forward, jumping into action, right? He will feel empathy and he will still move. He's still going to choose. He's still going to protect, right? And I think that's what makes it so grounding to watch, right? Because it shows that feeling deeply doesn't have to mean losing your direction. Um, and that's where I feel like this month's quote really fit for me, right? Um, I don't know who this quote is by, but it's one that I've heard a lot. You're not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, right? It doesn't mean that you care less. It just means that you don't disappear in the process of caring. So I've really been sitting with this question myself. Where in your life are you being really understanding with other people, but maybe not as connected to your own needs, right, as you are with theirs? And what would it look like to stay open without losing yourself in it? Um, that's something that I think could be just a good thing maybe for us to reflect on for ourselves, right? But also too just within the context of what we've been watching together. So next month, right? What are we getting into? Well, as no surprise, of course, Fruits Basket, Demon Slayer, we are committed. We are going to continue with these, right? But the movie that we're going to be watching is The Tale of Princess Kaguya. Another one that I haven't seen. I feel like I always say this, like most movies you can bet that I probably haven't seen because I have been slacking, okay, on the movies, but we're gonna get into it. We're gonna see what it's about. And I'm excited. But yeah, that is what's been sitting with me this month. You know, just this mix of care, tension, trying to figure out right where I end and where other people begin. Um, if anything resonated with you, I'm really glad that you're here. Um, I hope, this time just gave you space to maybe just think a little bit more deeply about, oh, I would say, think deeply about and engage, right, more deeply with what we've been watching together. So rest easy, feel deeply, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye, everybody.